Washington, D.C., November 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis had ended just weeks ago. The world had stepped back from nuclear war, but the tension in the White House remained thick as smoke. In this atmosphere of paranoia and power, an invitation was sent that would create a conflict Bobby Kennedy could never forget. Katharine Hepburn received the call on a Tuesday afternoon, not from some assistant or protocol officer, but from President Kennedy himself. His voice carried that familiar Massachusetts accent, warm but tired. "Miss Hepburn, I'd like to meet you, privately. Would you consider coming to Washington?" Katharine had been expecting something like this. Her latest film, Long Day's Journey into Night, had earned critical acclaim and whispers of another Oscar nomination. Presidents, she'd learned, liked to associate themselves with cultural achievements, but there was something different in Kennedy's tone, something personal. "When?" she asked. "Next week. Whenever works for you." No negotiations through staff, no formal protocols, just a direct request from the most powerful man in America to the most uncompromising woman in Hollywood. But Bobby Kennedy had other ideas. The Attorney General learned of the invitation within hours. His network of informants and surveillance was legendary, and nothing happened in his brother's schedule without his knowledge. This meeting troubled him deeply. Katharine Hepburn was exactly the kind of person Bobby didn't trust. Independent, wealthy enough to be immune to government pressure, smart enough to see through political maneuvering, and worst of all, she had opinions about everything and the fearlessness to voice them. Bobby made his position clear in a heated conversation with the president. "She's unpredictable, Jack. You can't control what she'll say or do." Kennedy's response was tired. "Maybe that's exactly what I need right now. Someone who doesn't want anything from me. Everyone wants something. That's how Washington works. Then maybe I need someone from outside Washington." Bobby's jaw tightened. His brother had been different since the missile crisis. More isolated, more questioning of the advisors who surrounded him. This meeting with Hepburn felt dangerous in ways Bobby couldn't articulate. The invitation stood. Katharine arrived in Washington on a gray November morning. She took the train, traveling alone as always. No entourage, no publicity team, just herself in a small overnight bag. Bobby Kennedy was waiting at Union Station. This was unprecedented. The Attorney General of the United States personally intercepting a Hollywood actress. Katharine saw him before he approached, recognized the sharp features and cold eyes from newspaper photographs. "Miss Hepburn," his voice was clipped, professional. "I'm Robert Kennedy. I know who you are." They stood in the busy terminal, commuters flowing around them like water around stones. Bobby moved closer, lowering his voice. "I want to talk to you before you see my brother." "About what?" "About why you're here. About what you hope to accomplish." Katharine's eyes never wavered from his. "I'm here because your brother invited me. That's the beginning and end of my agenda." "I don't believe that." "I don't care what you believe." Bobby's face darkened. He'd expected deference, perhaps some nervousness at meeting the Attorney General unexpectedly. Instead, he was facing a woman who seemed utterly unimpressed by his power. "My brother is under enormous pressure. He doesn't need complications." "And you think I'm a complication?" "I think you're unpredictable, and unpredictable people are dangerous to presidents." Katharine stepped closer. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steel hard. "Mr. Kennedy, I've been handling pressure since before you learned to walk. I've been dealing with powerful men trying to control me for 30 years. Your brother invited me because he wanted to meet me. If that threatens you, that says more about your insecurities than my intentions." Bobby's hands clenched at his sides. "Are you threatening the Attorney General of the United States?" "I'm stating facts to a man who seems confused about the difference between protection and paranoia." The stare down lasted 10 seconds. Then Bobby stepped back, his face flushed with anger and something else. Recognition, perhaps, that he'd met someone who wouldn't bend. "The meeting is at 3 o'clock. Don't be late." He walked away without another word, but Katharine noticed something. Two men in plain suits had been watching the entire exchange from across the terminal. FBI agents, she guessed. Bobby Kennedy's insurance policy. She was being watched. The White House meeting was arranged with unusual secrecy. No press, no official record. Katharine was brought through a side entrance, away from tourists and cameras. A young Secret Service agent, tall and professional, escorted her through corridors she'd never seen in photographs. "I'm Agent Morrison," the woman said quietly. "The president is looking forward to meeting you." "Is Mr. Kennedy usually this secretive about his appointments?" Agent Morrison glanced around, then spoke carefully. "The Attorney General prefers discretion when it comes to the president's meetings with cultural figures." Cultural figures? People from Hollywood. He believes they can be influential in ways that might not serve the president's interests. They reached a small sitting room, not the Oval Office, but something more intimate. Personal photographs on the side tables, comfortable furniture, books scattered around. This was Kennedy's private space. The president entered 5 minutes later. Up close, he looked younger than his photographs suggested, but also more tired. The missile crisis had aged him, carved lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. "Miss Hepburn, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. For the first time since arriving in Washington, Katharine felt like she was dealing with a real person instead of a political calculation. "Mr. President, please sit. Can I offer you something to drink?" They settled into chairs facing each other. Kennedy poured 2 glasses of bourbon from a crystal decanter. The afternoon light coming through the windows was soft, almost golden. "I saw a long day's journey into night last week," Kennedy said. "Extraordinary performance. You made that family's pain feel universal." "O'Neill wrote the pain. I just tried not to get in the way of it." Kennedy smiled. "That's exactly what I mean. No ego, no showiness, just truth." They talked about the film, about O'Neill's work, about the challenge of bringing complex literary characters to life on screen. Kennedy was surprisingly knowledgeable about theater and literature, more so than most politicians Katharine had met. But something was troubling him. She could see it in the way his eyes would drift toward the window, in the way his fingers drummed against his glass when he thought she wasn't looking. "Mr. President, are you all right?" Kennedy paused, surprised by her directness. "That's a complicated question. Most important questions are." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the south lawn. "Do you ever feel like you're performing all the time? Like every gesture, every word, every expression is being analyzed for political meaning?" "Yes." "How do you handle it?" "I remember that I'm not performing for them. I'm being myself, and if they don't like it, that's their problem." Kennedy turned back to her. "It's different when you're president. When you're yourself and people don't like it, wars can start." "Is that what happened in Cuba?" Kennedy's face tightened. "Cuba was complicated. We came very close to something terrible, closer than the public knows. But you pulled back." "I pulled back because I was terrified. Because for 13 days I carried the weight of human civilization in my hands, and I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except the possibility that one wrong decision would end everything." Katharine had never heard a president speak with such raw honesty. Politicians spent their careers learning to deflect, to soften, to never reveal weakness. Kennedy was doing the opposite. "And now?" she asked. "Now I wonder if I'm strong enough for this job, if anyone is." Before Katharine could respond, the door opened. Bobby Kennedy entered without knocking, his face stern. "Jack, you have a briefing in 10 minutes. "I know my schedule, Bobby." "The briefing moved up. National security matter." Kennedy's expression hardened. "I wasn't told about any changes." Bobby's eyes flicked to Katharine, then back to his brother. "I'm telling you now." The tension in the room was suffocating. Katharine realized she was witnessing something personal, a power struggle between brothers that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with her presence. Kennedy stood slowly. "Miss Hepburn, I'm afraid I have to cut our conversation short." "Of course." As she rose to leave, Kennedy did something unexpected. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small pin, gold with the presidential seal. "I want you to have this, as a thank you for the conversation." "Mr. President, I couldn't. Please." It's not often I get to talk to someone who isn't trying to influence policy or advance an agenda. You reminded me why I love literature before I love politics." Katharine accepted the pin. Bobby's face darkened further, but he said nothing. Agent Morrison escorted Katharine out of the White House. As they walked through the corridors, the agent spoke quietly. That was brave what you did in there. I didn't do anything. You treated him like a person instead of a president. You have no idea how rare that is. They reached the exit. Agent Morrison hesitated, then spoke again. Be careful, Miss Hepburn. The Attorney General has a long memory. Katharine returned to Connecticut that evening. She told no one about the meeting, not her friends, not the press. The conversation felt private, sacred somehow. Kennedy had shown her something vulnerable, and she would protect that. 2 weeks later, the president was dead. Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. Katharine was at home when the news came. She sat in front of her television for hours, watching the same terrible footage over and over. The young president, who had spoken to her about fear and isolation, was gone, killed in the street like a common criminal. She thought about their conversation, about his exhaustion and his honesty. Had he sensed something? Had there been warnings she didn't recognize? The call came 3 days after the funeral. Agent Morrison's voice was strained. Miss Hepburn, the Attorney General wants to speak with you. About what? About your meeting with the president. About what was discussed. When? Now. He's flying to Connecticut. He'll be at your house in 2 hours. Katharine hung up the phone and sat in her study, holding the presidential pin Kennedy had given her. Outside, November rain was falling on bare trees. The world felt different now, colder somehow. Bobby Kennedy arrived with 2 FBI agents and a stenographer. They set up in Katharine's living room as if it were an interrogation facility. Bobby looked haggard, his eyes red with grief and sleeplessness. Miss Hepburn, I need you to tell me everything my brother said to you. Every word you can remember. Why? Because I'm trying to understand what happened. Whether he knew something, whether there were warnings, whether someone should have seen this coming. Katharine studied Bobby's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by desperate pain. This wasn't the Attorney General conducting an investigation. This was a brother trying to make sense of an incomprehensible loss. We talked about literature, about the pressure of public life, about fear. What kind of fear? The fear of making mistakes with consequences, the fear of being responsible for other people's lives. Bobby wrote furiously. Did he mention any specific threats? No. Any concerns about his safety? Not directly. What does that mean? Katharine chose her words carefully. He talked about the weight of the presidency, about how every decision carries the possibility of catastrophe. It wasn't about physical threats. It was about the burden of power. Bobby's pen stopped moving. He said that? About catastrophe? He was talking about Cuba, about how close we came to nuclear war, about the responsibility he felt for preventing it. Anything else? Katharine hesitated. Kennedy had said something else, something that now seemed prophetic. He talked about performance, about how every gesture was analyzed, about the difficulty of being genuine in public life. But that felt too personal to share, too private. No, nothing else. Bobby stared at her, his eyes searching her face. You're holding something back. I'm protecting your brother's privacy. My brother is dead. He doesn't need privacy anymore. Katharine's voice hardened. He deserves it anyway. Bobby slammed his hand on the coffee table. Damn your discretion. A man is dead, and you're worried about embarrassing him? I'm worried about honoring him. They stared at each other across the living room. Finally, Bobby spoke again, his voice quieter but no less intense. Give me the pin. What? The pin he gave you. It's government property. It belongs in evidence. Evidence of what? Of the meeting. Of what was discussed. Katharine reached into her purse and pulled out the small gold pin. She'd been carrying it since the day Kennedy gave it to her. She set it on the table between them. Bobby picked it up with trembling hands. For a moment, all the anger left his face, replaced by pure grief. He gave these to people he trusted, Bobby whispered. People he thought genuinely cared about him. I did care about him. Bobby looked up at her, tears forming in his eyes. Did you? Or were you just another Hollywood star collecting a presidential meeting for your scrapbook? The accusation hit like a slap. Katharine stood up, her own anger finally breaking free. Your brother invited me because he was lonely, because he needed to talk to someone who wouldn't judge him or use his words against him or turn every conversation into a political calculation. He needed to be human for an hour instead of being president. That's what I gave him. Nothing more, nothing less. Bobby's face crumpled. He was lonely, desperately. I was trying to protect him. You were trying to control him. There's a difference. Bobby gathered his papers, pocketed the pin, and left without another word. The FBI agents followed. Katharine sat alone in her living room, feeling like something precious had been stolen from her. But Bobby Kennedy wasn't finished. Over the next 2 years, Katharine became aware of government attention. Tax audits that went deeper than usual, background checks on projects she was considering. Friends in Hollywood mentioned FBI agents asking questions about her political views, her associations, her travels. She was being watched, investigated, punished for a conversation that had meant nothing to anyone except 2 people, one of whom was dead. Bobby Kennedy never found what he was looking for because there was nothing to find. No conspiracy, no hidden messages, no secret agenda. Just a lonely president and a stubborn actress who treated each other like human beings for one November afternoon. In 1968, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles. Katharine felt a strange sadness at the news. He had been her adversary, had made her life difficult, had questioned her motives and her character. But he had also been a man destroyed by grief, lashing out at anyone who reminded him of what he'd failed to protect. 3 years after Bobby's death, a package arrived at Katharine's Connecticut home. No return address, just her name and address in elegant handwriting. Inside was the presidential pin and a note. Miss Hepburn, I found this among Bobby's personal effects. He kept it in his private safe, not in any evidence file. I think he understood eventually that you gave Jack something precious in his final weeks, a moment of genuine human connection. Bobby was wrong to take this from you. It belongs with you, Ethel Kennedy. Katharine held the pin and remembered that November afternoon. Kennedy's tired eyes, his honest questions, his desperate need to be seen as something more than a political figure. Bobby had tried to stop their handshake, their conversation, their moment of connection. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was real. And in Washington, reality was always the most dangerous thing of all. She kept the pin in a small frame in her study. Sometimes when reporters asked about meeting President Kennedy, she would say, I met him once. He was a good man carrying an impossible burden. But she never told the whole story. Some moments were too precious to share, too human to reduce to anecdotes. The handshake Bobby Kennedy tried to stop lasted only seconds. The conversation he interrupted went on for barely an hour. But the understanding it created, the brief connection between 2 people trying to remain human in an inhuman world, that lasted forever. And perhaps that's what Bobby had really been afraid of. Not that Katharine would influence his brother politically, but that she would remind him of what he was losing by being president. His humanity, his privacy, his right to simple conversation without consequence. In the end, Bobby Kennedy learned the same lesson his brother had tried to share that November afternoon. Power without human connection is just elaborate loneliness. And loneliness, whether you're president or attorney general or Hollywood star, is the most dangerous thing of all.